Well, good morning. Tech and I are all ready to give you boys some information on 1953 body service.
Good. Where do we start?
I thought I'd talk about door alignment first, Bill. Let's take a look at the door on this car. You'll notice that this door is centered in its opening.
And that's mighty important. A door should be centered and fit flush with the body panel.
Right, Tech. Some of the hinges used in our new cars are different than the older models, so I have some examples here to show you. If you want to change the alignment of a door, you usually start by adjusting the position of the hinges, as you know. So, let's take a look at these new hinges. For identification purposes, let's call them the box type and the strap type. The box type hinge is the type that has been used in the past and is still being used on Chrysler and SOTO front doors. The strap type hinge also has been used in the past. However, it has been redesigned to provide an in-swinging effect to the door.
You better explain how you can move those hinges to adjust the alignment of the doors, Tom.
Will do, Tech. Let's begin with the box type hinge. The box type hinge is fastened to the body pillar by 5 screws secured by caged nuts.
The screw holes are slotted horizontally so you can shift the hinge in or out.
Say, that's all right. That means that you can move the door in or out by loosening those hinge retaining screws, right?
That's right, Bill.
What about a vertical and a fore and aft adjustment?
To make a vertical or a fore and aft adjustment, Bill, you'll have to remove the door inside hardware and trim panel. Then you'll have to loosen the screws that attach the hinge to a reinforcing panel inside the door. These screws go into a tapped plate caged to the panel.
Right, Tom. Those screw holes are slotted fore and aft and are slightly oversized.
I get it. This allows a fore and aft adjustment and a slight vertical adjustment.
That's it, Jim. And now let's look at the strap type hinge. You'll find this type hinge on all rear doors and on the front doors of Dodge and Plymouth. However, the way the strap type hinge is mounted determines the manner of making adjustments. For example, the body strap of the hinge is mounted on the face of the body pillar through horizontally slotted and oversized holes. So you can move the hinge up and down slightly and also in and out on the pillar. The door strap of the hinge, however, may be mounted on the front face of the door, or it may go through the face and mount to a reinforcing panel inside the door.
What about fore and aft adjustment with this strap type hinge, Tom?
Well, that's why I wanted to explain the different mounting positions, Bill. You see, if the hinge is mounted on the face of the door and the door is too close to the body pillar, it can be moved away by placing a shim between the hinge and the pillar. A shim between the body pillar and the hinge at the inner bolt only will move the pivot of the hinge forward, decreasing the spacing between the door and the pillar.
Yeah, but what do you do if SHIMS won't do the job, Tom?
If the shims don't do the job, Jim, it will be necessary to remove the hinge and bend it in an arbor press.
Right, but don't try to bend that hinge while it's installed on the car. You might bend the mounting surface of the body pillar or the door face.
If the hinge is mounted to the reinforcing panel inside the door, you can remove the trim and adjust the door fore and aft.
You can also move the door up and down with that type of mounting, Bill.
Suppose you use up all the adjustment you have at the hinges, but the door still doesn't fit right. Then what?
Then you have to shim the body. Tell him, Tom.
Right, Tech. I can show you how that works on this Chrysler. Suppose you have a condition where the rear door binds near the top at the lock pillar, but spacing appears to be correct at the hinge pillar. To correct this condition, start shimming at the number 4 body bolt, located beneath the leading edge of the rear fender molding. This will force the top of the lock pillar away from the upper rear edge of the door. Continue to add shims until the spacing between the lock pillar and the rear door is the same as the spacing between the door and the hinge pillar.
Yeah, I see that. But wouldn't too many shims tend to affect body alignment at some other point?
Yes, they might, Bill. So if several shims are needed, you'll have to add shims to the other body bolts to maintain support for the body. If you have a rear door that is low and sags when it is opened, you'll probably correct this condition by shimming at the number 3 body bolt, located about 2 inches back from the hinge pillar. Continue shimming until the door is brought up to proper alignment. If you have a front door that sags when it is opened, Add shims to the number 2 body bolt located below the front edge of the front door.
Say, Tom, the front door on my car is high at the rear edge. What do I do to correct this condition?
To correct that condition, Jim, first check the number 2 bolt for excessive shims and remove them. If no shims are found at the number 2 body bolt, then shim the number 1 body bolt, located about 8 inches back from the bottom edge of the front wheel fender skirt. This shimming will cause the hinge pillar to tilt back at the top in relation to the frame. Add shims until the door is centered in the opening.
Remember to tighten those body bolts 10 to 20 foot-pounds, except on number 1. Number 1 doesn't have a metal spacer, so you pull that down until the rubber insulator is compressed 1/8 of an inch.
That's right. And all body bolts on convertibles are tightened 15 to 25 foot-pounds. And that about covers body shimming for door alignment. There are other door alignment conditions, of course, and you'll find their corrections in the reference book. Now, if you'll come around to the front of this car, I'll give you the story on hood adjustment and alignment. You'll notice that the hood is attached to the body by 2 counterbalanced hinges.
And remember, all the hood hinges are of the same type, although some have 1 front mounting bolt and others 2. But adjustment is the same.
The upper section of the hinge assembly is fastened to the hood flange and the hood lateral strainer.
And the lower half of the hinge assembly is fastened to the hood hinge support bracket and to the cowl panel. The rear mounting studs go through the cowl panel and are held by nuts and lock washers. They can be reached from the inside of the car up under the instrument panel.
And now that we know how the hood is attached to the body, let's talk about some adjustments that can be made when the hood is found to be out of alignment. Fore and aft and some vertical adjustments can be made by moving the hood hinge up and down in the oversized holes in the support bracket. Suppose you find that you have too much clearance between the rear edge of the hood and the cowl panel. Here's what you'll have to do to make this adjustment. First, prop the hood open to relieve tension on the springs. Then, loosen the 2 rear stud nuts of the lower hinge plate. Now, drive the rear of the hinge back and down with a hammer and blunt drift, and check the alignment of the hood to cowl clearance. When the correct adjustment has been obtained, tighten the retaining nuts.
What about a hood that is binding at the cowl panel, Tom?
Well, if you find that condition, loosen the front stud nut and drive the front of the hinge downward to raise the rear end of the hood.
Say, Tom, I have a condition on my car just like this one here. The front of the hood is too close to one fender. Do you use shims to get more space?
Yes, you do, Bill. Just insert U-shaped shims over the top bolt between the radiator support bracket and the fender flange to move the fender out.
Of course, the 3 fender to radiator support bracket bolts beneath the fender must be loosened first.
That's right.
Do you do the same thing if there's not enough space between the rear of the hood and one fender, Tom?
No, Jim. There's a different method of making this adjustment.
Hold it right there. Somebody better turn this record before we're caught talking to ourselves.
Thanks, Tech. Now, as I was about to say, if the rear of the hood is too close to the fender, you'll have to loosen the bolts which hold the hood flange to the hinge plate on that side. Then, push the hood in to obtain the proper clearance. Tighten the mounting bolts to hold the hood in place.
Right. And for correct adjustment, the spacing on both sides of the hood should be equal.
What if the rear of the hood is too close to one fender and too far from the other?
In that case, you'd loosen all of the hinge-to-hood attaching bolts and diagonal strainer bolts on both sides of the hood and shift the rear end of the hood until the spacing is equalized. Then tighten the bolts.
Tell them what to do when the hood flange doesn't follow the contour of the fender, Tom.
If the contour of the hood doesn't quite match that of the fenders, the hood can be reshaped by using a small block of wood.
Block of wood, huh? How do you do that?
You need a small block about 1 inch square. Here's the one I use. Place it right here on the fender flange just opposite the low spot in the hood. Now, close the hood slowly, and with the hands placed just ahead of the block, gently apply pressure to the hood.
And repeat the operation every 6 inches until the contour of the hood conforms to the fender.
Right, Tech. And now let's cover one more condition before we talk about adjustment of deck lids.
And I'll bet that's the one about what to do when the front edge of the hood doesn't close down far enough to meet the fenders.
Yeah, you're a mind reader, Tech. And it's an easy condition to correct. Just shorten the striker to draw the hood closer to the lock plate and your condition is gone. Well, now let's talk about deck lid adjustment. Let's take a look at the deck lid hinges. You'll notice that the hinge upper mounting flange is secured to the deck lid by these two bolts.
And both bolt holes in the mounting flange are slotted to allow the deck lid to be adjusted fore and aft. They are also slightly oversized to allow for slight lateral adjustment.
Right, Tech. Now, the counterbalance spring and lower hinge assembly is mounted to the hinge support bracket. The bracket bolt holes are also slotted to allow for adjustments to bring the surface of the lid flush with the body panels.
I suppose that the correctly fitted rear deck lid would be one that was centered in the opening, one that fits flush with the body panels.
That's right, Jim.
Tell them about the paper check, Tom.
Paper check? Oh, yeah, good. That's a good idea. Hand me that paper off the bench, Jim. To make this test, close the deck lid on strips of paper. If the papers fit snug all along the edge of the lid, when you pull them out, you've got a good seal.
Say, that's all right. And if the papers fit loosely on one side, but are tight on the other, the lid needs a lining.
Right, Jim. Another check you want to make is the latch-striker relationship. They may need adjusting to make the deck lid fit snugly.
How do you adjust them, Tom?
It's very simple, Jim. Remember, the latch has to get a good bite in the striker plate. If it closes too easily, it won't compress the seal enough to make it watertight. Now, while this latch is adjustable, you'll usually get better results by adjusting the striker plate. The striker plate can be moved from side to side to line it up with the latch, and can also be moved from front to rear. As it moves to the rear, it also rises, which makes it easier to close the lid without slamming.
And by moving the striker plate toward the front, it lowers, making it harder to close the lid. But you'll be getting a better seal.
Now, to lower the latch, loosen the 3 screws in the latch itself, just enough to move the latch downward to the proper engaging position. Then tighten the screws.
Better caution them about getting that push-button latch release out of position, Tom.
Right, Tech. Some models have this push-button latch, while others have the turn-handle type. Don't move the push-button type latch very much, because you might move it away from the latch release. Then the push-button won't release the latch and the lid won't open.
Say, Tom, I've been looking at this quarter panel. What's the story on panel replacement, now that the panel and the fender are all one?
I'm glad you brought that up, Bill. I've got time to go over quarter panel replacement with you and Jim, if you'd like to have me do it.
We sure would, Tom.
Well, I might as well talk about the Plymouth panel first. You got anything to say before I start, Tech?
Only this, Tom. Repairing a damaged panel isn't any different than it ever was. If you have a section that you can't bump out, maybe because there's a bad tear, you just cut out a piece from a repair panel and weld it in place.
That's a good point, Tech. But let's suppose that you decide to replace the entire quarter panel on a damaged car. You'd want to know just where you'd have to cut the damaged panel in order to replace it with a new panel, wouldn't you?
That's right.
On this Plymouth 4-door sedan, the quarter panel starts at the bottom of the door pillar, goes up to the roof panel, then follows the contour of the roof panel and rear window, and back along the deck opening, upper panel to the deck opening. From the upper corner, the weld line follows the edge of the deck opening for about 4 inches, and then cuts back to the crown above the rear wheel. It follows the crown back to the tail lamp opening and down to the stone shield. That's the size of the panel you'll get when you order a repair panel.
You better tell them about that rear panel, Tom.
Right, Tech. This rear panel fills the space between the deck opening and the boundary of the front panel. You have to order this rear panel separate. Although the quarter panels on the Club Coupe are different in shape, they cover the same general area as the 4-door sedan, but include the opening for the quarter window.
What about the 4-door Dodge, Tom? Is the quarter panel the same as the Plymouth?
Not quite, Bill. Because of the shape of the Dodge roof, the quarter panel extends up the rear door lock pillar to the lower end of the roof drain trough. From there, it extends back along the lower edge of the rear window opening for about 6 inches in from the side of the deck opening. It runs along the edge of the deck opening to a point about 3 inches below the top of the tail lamp opening. Then it goes up to the top of the tail lamp opening, around the opening and down to the bottom.
Remember, the Dodge also has a rear panel which comes separate from the quarter panel.
And now let's talk about the DeSoto and Chrysler 4-door quarter panels. Since the area covered is the same for both makes, it is easy to distinguish them from the Dodge and Plymouth models. You'll notice that there is a bolted-on fender panel on both the Chrysler and DeSoto. This fender panel is not part of the quarter panel. The 4-door quarter panel begins at a spot on the lock pillar just above the bolted-on fender panel and extends upward to the lower edge of the roof panel.
And that point is in line with the lower edge of the rear window opening.
Right, Tech. Then it follows along the lower edge of the rear window opening to a point about 6 inches in from the side of the deck opening. Then it goes along the side of the deck lid opening to a point about 2 inches below the top of the tail lamp opening. At this point, it goes up to the top of the tail lamp opening and then around the tail lamp opening to the bolted-on fender panel.
That fender panel bolts to the lower flange of the quarter panel and to the body floor panel extension.
I got you, Tech.
The Chrysler and DeSoto also have a rear panel, which fills in between the tail lamp opening and the rear deck opening.
Well, that explains how much metal you get when you order a new quarter panel. I'm glad to know that.
Me too, Bill. That'll make it easier to decide whether to repair the old panel or put in a new one.
You'll find the same information on the quarter panels for the other body styles in this reference book.
Thanks a lot, Tech.
Don't mention it, my boy. If you follow the simple information me and Tom have given you, you'll find that a lot of body work will be right up your alley. And listen, the more you know about any kind of a job that comes into the shop, the better mechanic you're going to be. And customers are going to take their cars to mechanics who know.